What's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel. 10 planes 0 survivors, first flight disasters. If you're new here, we explore the most insane and unbelievable stories, and today is absolutely no exception. Most of us get on a plane without a second thought, trusting that it's been tested and is perfectly safe. But what about the first time a plane ever takes off? Imagine spending millions of dollars and years of work on a brand new aircraft, only for it to crash and burn literally minutes into its very first flight. It sounds like a nightmare, but it has happened more times than you would think. Today we are counting down 10 of the most shocking and tragic stories of planes that never even made it past their first flight. We're going to look at everything from futuristic flying wings to supersonic passenger jets that were meant to change the world, but instead went down in history for all the wrong reasons. These aren't just stories about mechanical failures, they're tales of incredible ambition. The footage and stories you are about to see are absolutely insane. So strap in, because this is going to be a wild ride. We have spent days researching these unbelievable crashes, and I promise you will not believe what you're about to see. Before we get into it, I want to know what you think. If you know of any other infamous first flight crashes that we didn't include, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm curious to see what other crazy stories are out there. Let's get started. Kicking off our list is a story that is beyond tragic. Meet the de Havilland DH-108, a British experimental aircraft from the 1940s. This plane looked like something straight out of a sci-fi movie with its swept-wing design, no tail. It was built to test how this radical design would handle at high speeds, paving the way for future jet airliners. The company behind it, de Havilland, was one of the biggest names in aviation, and their expectations for this plane were through the roof. They were literally trying to break the sound barrier. The man chosen for the first high-speed test flight of the second prototype was none other than Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. Not only was he the company's chief test pilot, he was also the son of the company's founder. Can you imagine the pressure? On September 27, 1946, Geoffrey climbed into the cockpit, ready to make history. The plan was simple: take the DH-108 up and push it as close to the speed of sound as possible. The flight started perfectly. The plane took off smoothly, and Geoffrey began his high-speed dive from 10,000 feet. On the ground, everyone was holding their breath, listening to the radio, waiting for him to report his speed. But then, there was silence. The plane was last seen in a steep dive over the Thames estuary. Suddenly, people on the ground reported hearing a massive explosion. The DH-108 had completely disintegrated in mid-air. They were pushing the aircraft to its absolute limit, and it just couldn't handle the intense aerodynamic forces. The recovery mission was heartbreaking. They found wreckage scattered over a huge area, and Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. was killed instantly. Next up we have one of the most public and infamous first flight disasters in history. This is the Tupolev Tu-144, the Soviet Union's answer to the British-French Concorde, a supersonic passenger jet, a symbol of Soviet technological power during the Cold War. In 1973 they chose the biggest stage, the Paris Air Show, a public demonstration in front of hundreds of thousands of spectators and the world's media. It was their moment to prove they were better than the West. The Concorde had already flown earlier that day. Its demo was conservative, some called it boring. The Soviets saw their chance to outshine it. On June 3, 1973, the Tu-144 took to the skies for its public debut. Pilot Mikhail Kozlov was ordered to fly a far more aggressive demonstration than the Concorde. The Tu-144 roared into the sky, impressive climbs and sharp turns. The crowd was captivated. After a low pass, the pilot pulled into a brutally steep climb. The move looked spectacular, but it stressed the airframe. At the top, the plane appeared to stall. It nosed over into a violent dive. The left wing snapped off. The rest of the aircraft broke apart in a massive fireball. Flaming debris rained down on Goussainville, destroying 15 houses and a school. All 6 people on board were killed, along with 8 people on the ground. The disaster was captured on camera from dozens of angles. The first public flight ended in catastrophic explosion before the world. The exact cause is still debated. Some theories say the pilots were avoiding a French Mirage jet that was filming them, forcing the fatal maneuver. Imagine a plane that looks like a giant boomerang. That was the Northrop YB-49, a prototype jet-powered heavy bomber developed for the United States Air Force right after World War II. This thing was revolutionary. It had no fuselage, it had no tail, it was just one massive wing. The idea, far better aerodynamic efficiency. and harder for enemy radar to detect. Basically a stealth bomber decades early. Jack Northrop had dreamed of a flying wing his whole life. This was his masterpiece. On June 5, 1948, the second YB-49 prototype took off. From what is now Edwards Air Force Base, California, pilot in command, Major Daniel Forbes. He was joined by a crew of 4, including Captain Glenn Edwards. Their mission, demanding flight envelope tests. For hours, everything went according to plan. Crew radioed back data, all seemed normal. Then, just after 11 a.m., radio contact was lost. A search was launched. What they found was devastating. The YB-49 had crashed in the Mojave Desert, north of the base. The aircraft had disintegrated, leaving a massive debris field. There were no survivors. All 5 crew members were killed. Daniel Forbes, Glenn Edwards. The dream of the flying wing became a nightmare. Investigators struggled. Plane was so destroyed. Prevailing theory, major structural failure in the wing. Outer wing sections may have torn off during a maneuver. The aircraft tumbled uncontrollably. The crash sank confidence in the flying wing. The Air Force canceled the project shortly after. Decades later, the U.S. would build another flying wing, the B-2 Spirit. In the 1930s, the world was on the brink of war, and the United States Army Air Corps wanted a bomber that could fly farther and carry more bombs. They dreamed of a flying fortress that could cross oceans. The answer to this dream was supposed to be the Boeing XB-15. This thing was an absolute monster for its time. It was so big that the wings were thick enough crew members could crawl inside to make in-flight engine repairs. It was the largest and heaviest aircraft built in the United States at that point. On October 15, 1937, the single XB-15 prototype was ready for its maiden flight at Boeing Field in Seattle. A huge crowd gathered. The test pilot, Eddie Allen, was a legend, but even he must have been nervous. The 4 huge engines roared to life, and the XB-15 began its takeoff roll. It lumbered down the runway, slowly gathering speed, but it was using up a lot more runway than anyone expected. It was just so heavy. The plane finally lifted off the ground, but it was clear something was wrong. It was struggling to climb, dangerously underpowered. The plane was so heavy, and the engines, despite being the most powerful available, just weren't strong enough to make it perform as designed. The first flight lasted for a while, but it was a terrifying experience. The plane was sluggish, unresponsive, and incredibly difficult to control. The pilots managed a circuit and prepared for landing. Miraculously, Eddie Allen managed to land the behemoth safely, but the flight was declared a total failure. The Army Air Corps realized the XB-15 was a dead end. It was simply too big and too underpowered to be an effective bomber. While it didn't crash in a fiery explosion like the others on this list, its first flight was its last in a practical sense. It proved the concept was a disaster. The plane was relegated to cargo and was eventually scrapped. Its first flight crashed the entire program before it even got started. During the Cold War, Canada wanted to build its own advanced fighter jet to defend its massive northern airspace. The result was the Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck, a powerful all-weather interceptor. This was a huge deal for the Canadian aviation industry. It was the first jet fighter designed and built entirely in Canada. The hopes of a nation were literally riding on this plane. The first prototype was rolled out with immense pride, ready to show the world what Canada could do. It was a sleek, powerful machine designed for one thing: high-speed, high-altitude interception. On January 19, 1950, the CF-100 prototype, nicknamed the Clunk by its pilots, was set for its very first flight. The test pilot was Bill Waterton, an experienced aviator from the Royal Air Force. The weather at the Malton Airport in Toronto wasn't perfect, but they decided to go ahead. The whole company was watching. The engine spooled up, and the CF-100 roared down the runway and into the Canadian sky. The initial part of the flight seemed to go well. Waterton put the new jet through some basic maneuvers, testing its handling and response. Everything appeared to be functioning as expected. He was flying for about an hour, getting a feel for the brand new aircraft. But as he was preparing to return to the airport, disaster struck without any warning. During a turn, one of the wingtips experienced a catastrophic structural failure. It literally just ripped away from the rest of the aircraft. Instantly, the plane became violently uncontrollable. Imagine trying to drive a car after one of your front wheels just flies off. Waterton fought with the controls, but the jet was tumbling through the air. In a split-second decision that saved his life, he ejected from the crippled aircraft. He parachuted down safely, but he had to watch as the first ever Canadian-designed fighter jet spiraled into the ground and exploded. The very first flight of Canada's Great Hope ended in a fiery wreck. The investigation revealed a design flaw in the wing structure, which was thankfully corrected in future models. Now this next story is just wild. Meet the Martin XB-51, a 3-engine tactical bomber from the late 1940s. Look at this thing. It had 2 engines in pods under the front of the fuselage and a third one in the tail. 3-engine layout, variable incidence wing. The whole wing could tilt up and down. It was a super unconventional and complex design. The United States Air Force wanted a plane that could fly low and fast to attack ground targets, and the XB-51 was Martin's radical solution. The first flight was scheduled for October 28, 1949. The test pilot, Pat Tibbs, climbed into the cockpit of this bizarre-looking machine. One of the strangest features was its ejection seat, designed to eject downwards. This was supposed to be safer at high speeds but terrifying at low altitude. The flight itself was surprisingly successful, at least for a while. Tibbs flew for 35 minutes. The plane was fast, just as designed, but it also had serious problems. It was not very maneuverable and had a tendency to roll unexpectedly. The biggest issue came during landing. Because of the weird wing design and the bicycle-style landing gear, the plane was incredibly difficult to land. It came in way too fast. Tibbs got it on the ground, but he couldn't slow it. The XB-51 overran the runway, its landing gear collapsing as it skidded into the dirt. While the plane was heavily damaged and the flight was technically a crash, Tibbs thankfully walked away unharmed. The first flight immediately revealed the plane's fatal flaws, and though it didn't explode, this disastrous first landing was the beginning of the end for the XB-51 program. Alright, get ready for one of the weirdest concepts in aviation history, a jet-powered seaplane fighter. This is the Saunders-Roe SER.A/1. The idea came about during World War II. The British thought that in a future war in the Pacific, they would need a fighter that didn't require vulnerable aircraft carriers or land-based runways. So, they decided to build a fighter that could take off and land on water. It looked like a flying boat, but it was powered by 2 jet engines. It was a crazy, ambitious, and ultimately flawed idea. In July 1947, the first prototype was ready. The test pilot, Jeffrey Tyson, was a specialist in flying boats. On July 16th, he taxied the SR.A/1 out onto the Solent for high-speed taxi tests. As speed increased, it started to porpoise, the nose bouncing uncontrollably. He tried to correct it, but the bouncing worsened. On one bounce, the nose pitched up so violently that the plane accidentally became airborne. It wasn't a planned takeoff, it literally just bounced into the air. Tyson was now flying a plane he had never intended to take off in on its very first time out. He managed control briefly, but the situation was dangerous. As he attempted to land, the instability struck again. The plane hit the water hard, nose first. The impact flipped the aircraft and it sank. Miraculously, Jeffrey Tyson escaped and was rescued. The world's first jet-powered seaplane fighter crashed and sank on its very first and completely accidental flight. By the early 1940s, aircraft technology was advancing at an unbelievable pace. The Lockheed XP-49 was an experimental fighter developed as a potential successor to the legendary P-38 Lightning. It looked a lot like the P-38, with its distinctive twin-boom design. It had more powerful engines, and, most importantly, a pressurized cockpit. This would allow the pilot to fly at much higher altitudes where the air is just too thin to breathe, giving him a huge advantage over enemy fighters. The single prototype was ready for its first test flight on November 11, 1942. The man at the controls was Joe C. Towle, a day of huge anticipation for Lockheed. Towle fired up the 2 massive Continental engines. The XP-49 roared down the runway at Muroc. The takeoff was smooth. For a few minutes, everything seemed perfect. But the success was short-lived. Just 15 minutes into the flight, Towle radioed an emergency. There was a major problem with the landing gear. The portside door failed to retract and stuck open, creating huge drag. Then the starboard gear wouldn't come down at all. He faced a nightmare, landing with only one main wheel down. He chose a belly landing. Upon touchdown, the XP-49 skidded off the runway and was heavily damaged by fire. The first flight lasted only 15 minutes and ended in a wreck. In the early days of the Cold War, Britain needed high-altitude bombers capable of carrying a nuclear bomb. This led to the V-bombers. The first to fly was the Vickers Valiant, massive, swept wing and the pride of Britain's deterrent. The hopes and security of a nation rested on it. The first prototype, WB-210, flew May 18, 1951. The flight was a huge success, but we're not talking about that flight. On January 12, 1952, during a fuel system test, a massive fire broke out in the starboard wing. An engine feed pipe made of magnesium alloy had failed. At 10,000 feet, flames streamed from the wing. The fire burned through the main structure, a flying inferno. Pilot Jock Bryce ordered a bailout. 4 of 5 crew parachuted to safety. Tragically, co-pilot Bernie Lynch became trapped and was killed when the bomber crashed. The first prototype was completely destroyed. The investigation forced a crucial change: magnesium fuel lines replaced with steel. That change likely saved many lives across the Valiant fleet. For our final and perhaps most insane story, we have the Bell X-2 Starbuster. This wasn't a normal plane, it was a rocket-powered research aircraft. Designed to fly faster and higher than any other machine in history. Its goal was to explore flight beyond Mach 2 and Mach 3, an area known as the thermal thicket, where friction could literally melt an aircraft. On September 27, 1956, the X-2 was dropped from a B-50 bomber high above the California desert. The pilot was Captain Milburn Mel Apt, flying the X-2 for the very first time. He fired the rocket. The plane accelerated with unbelievable force. Apt flew the profile flawlessly. He pushed faster and in minutes reached Mach 3.196, over 2,000 miles per hour. He was the fastest man on Earth. But instead of slowing as briefed, Apt attempted a slight turn above Mach 3. Fatal mistake. At that speed, the controls were incredibly sensitive. The plane instantly lost control, entering violent inertia coupling. G-forces knocked him unconscious. The X-2 broke apart. His escape capsule separated, but the parachute did not deploy in time. He was killed on impact. On his very first flight in the X-2, Mel Apt became the fastest man alive and died just moments later. And that is it for 10 of the most unbelievable first-flight plane crashes in history. It is absolutely insane to think about the bravery of these test pilots who strapped themselves into completely unproven machines. Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., Mel Apartment. These stories are a powerful reminder of the incredible risks taken to push the boundaries of what's possible in the sky. Every time we step on a modern, safe airliner, we owe a debt to the lessons learned from these disasters and the people who lost their lives. Thank you all so much for watching. We spent an insane amount of time researching this, and I really hope you found these stories as fascinating as I did. If you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor. Destroy that like button. Make sure you're subscribed, so you don't miss out on what we have coming next. And I mean it. I want to hear from you guys. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be down there reading and replying to as many as I can. I can't tell you everything, but I will say our next video is going to be even crazier. We are diving deep into some of the biggest unsolved aviation mysteries of all time, planes that took off and just vanished from the face of the earth without a trace. You are not going to want to miss it, so hit that notification bell, and I will see you in the next video.